Iqbal was 61 years old when he began, for the first time in his life, to study English as though it mattered. It mattered because his son had moved to Canada 8 years earlier and had married a warm Canadian woman named Emily and had given him 2 grandchildren, a girl called Zainab who was 6 and a boy called Bilal who was 4. And every Sunday evening at 9 o'clock, Iqbal sat by the small computer his son had bought him the year before and watched his grandchildren wave at him from a bright kitchen half a world away. And he could not say a single warm sentence to either of them in the only language they truly spoke. He was not a stupid man. He had been a good accountant for 38 years, careful and quiet, respected in the small firm where he had worked. He had passed his English matriculation exam at 16 with a decent mark. He could read English newspapers with some effort. He could understand more than he could say. But he could not, at 61, produce a warm, natural English sentence quickly enough to make a small child laugh. And his grandchildren, whom he loved with the whole soft weight of an old man's heart, were spending their childhoods on the other side of his silence. His son, Ahmed, translated. Ahmed was kind about it. He would say in English to the children, "Dada is asking whether you had a good day at school." He would say in Urdu to Iqbal, "They are showing you their new dog, Papa. They got him last week." And in this way, for 8 years, Iqbal had watched his grandchildren grow up through the gentle, warm hands of his own son, who acted as a small bridge over a river that Iqbal had never learned to cross. His wife had died 2 years before. Since then, the Sundays had begun to feel very long. He would sit in his flat after the video call ended, and he would look at the small, dark computer screen, and he would think, with the small, sharp ache of a man who understands his own losses, that his grandchildren would grow up without ever really knowing his voice. They would remember, dimly, a gentle grandfather in Pakistan who smiled and waved but who never quite spoke to them. He did not want to be that grandfather. He wanted to be a real man in their small lives, but he did not know how to become that at 61. He had tried in his 50s to improve his English. He had bought a set of books. He had watched serious lectures on his computer. He had studied for 2 hours on a Saturday morning and then not remembered any of it by the following Saturday. He had come, slowly, to believe that his brain at his age was simply a jar with a small crack at the bottom. Whatever he poured into it in the morning had leaked out by evening. The turn came in the small autumn after his wife's 2nd yearly anniversary. He was sitting alone in his bedroom one night, unable to sleep, scrolling through his phone the way older lonely men do when the flat is very quiet, and he came across a small quiet video made by a woman with a warm voice who spoke about something Iqbal had never heard discussed anywhere. She spoke about what a person's brain did during the night while they slept, and how the last 15 minutes before sleep were the most powerful minutes of the entire day for building lasting memory. He watched the video twice. He watched it a 3rd time the following night, more slowly, taking small notes on a piece of paper that he kept beside his bed. She said things that made him sit up. She said his tired evening brain was not a problem, but an opportunity. She said the crack in his jar was not in the jar, but in the way he had been trying to fill it. She offered a small routine of 5 parts that he could do in his own quiet bedroom without anyone knowing he had begun. He began on a Monday because he had always begun important things on Mondays. It was a small habit from his working life that he had never lost. He kept a slow English audiobook on his phone that his son had recommended 2 Eids earlier and that he had never actually listened to. Now, at 10 in the evening, he sat in the small armchair by his bedroom window with a cup of warm milk and honey, and he listened to 10 minutes of the book. He did not test himself. He did not try to memorize anything. He only let the calm, warm voice of the narrator fall over him like a gentle rain that he had not felt in years. At the end of the 10 minutes, he chose 2 or 3 sentences that had touched him. He copied them onto a small notepad his wife had once used for grocery lists. She had left 20 blank pages at the end of it. He had not been able to bring himself to throw it away. Now he used it, one small line at a time, and it felt to him almost as though she was somehow helping him. He put his phone in the kitchen, in the small charging spot on the counter, and he came back to bed. He turned off the lamp, and in the soft dark he whispered each sentence to himself 3 times, softly, in the same voice he used to speak to himself when he was praying. He did not think about the sentences afterwards. He only let them float in the small dark room, and then he closed his eyes. Nothing happened for the first 2 weeks. He kept going, not because he believed, because he had nothing else, and because giving up would have required the kind of effort he no longer had in him. Then, on the 16th morning, standing in his kitchen boiling water for tea, he suddenly said aloud, to the empty kitchen, a whole warm sentence in English about how the morning light was falling through the window like honey. It was almost word for word a sentence he had whispered 5 nights earlier from the audiobook. He stopped stirring the tea. He stared at the small kettle. He was alone in his flat. Nobody had heard him. But he had heard himself, warmly and completely, in English, without translating first. It was the strangest and warmest thing that had happened to him in the 2 years since his wife's death. He sat down at his kitchen table with the tea and cried, quietly, without knowing exactly why. Perhaps because he had assumed for so many years that his brain was closed for renovation. Perhaps because he had finally been given something he could still do at 61. Perhaps because he had not spoken warmly to another person in months and had just heard his own voice speak warmly at last. He kept going after that with something like joy. The routine did not feel like study anymore. It felt like a small, warm ritual he shared with his own mind. He learned that many of the sentences from his evening audiobook began to arrive in his head during the day, unbidden, when he was buying vegetables at the market or walking to the mosque or watering the small plant on his balcony. He learned to smile a little when they came. He learned to say them out loud to himself, softly, so that his mouth would remember them for later. He made small, honest adaptations. He could not play soft audio through the night because his hearing at 61 was sensitive and he needed silence to sleep. He let that piece go without guilt. 4 parts of the routine, done warmly, were enough. He missed nights when he was ill, or when an old friend came for tea and stayed late, or when his knees ached badly. He came back to the routine the following evening without punishing himself. He had lived long enough to know that the practices that lasted in life were the ones that forgave you. On Sundays, he gathered his week of sentences on the small notepad and read them aloud in the afternoon light. Some of them had become his. He set those aside. Others still felt slightly new. He copied those onto a fresh page for another week. It was the piece he came to love most because it was proof in his wife's old shopping list notebook that he was actually moving. At the end of the first 90 nights, on a Sunday evening at 9 o'clock, he sat down in front of the small computer. Ahmed's face appeared, and then Zainab's, and then small Bilal's from behind her, holding a stuffed rabbit almost as large as he was. Iqbal took a small breath, and then warmly and slowly in careful English he said, "Hello, Zainab. Hello, Bilal. Grandfather has been learning English so he could speak with you. Would you like to tell me about your new dog?" Zainab's mouth opened slightly. She looked at her father. Then she looked back at the screen and she began, in a small, excited voice, to tell Iqbal in English about a large brown dog named Coco who liked to eat socks. Bilal added things she forgot. Iqbal understood almost every word. He asked small, warm questions. He held his part of the conversation, imperfectly, slowly, but warmly and honestly, for almost 11 minutes before he handed the call back to his son. When the call ended, Ahmed was quiet for a long moment on the screen. Then he said in Urdu, "Papa, how long have you been doing this?" 90 nights, Iqbal said softly, "and I plan to do 90 more." A year later, a neighbor of his, a widow of 68 whose grandchildren also lived abroad, came to have tea with him one afternoon and asked, in a small, tired voice, whether it was ever too late to learn a language properly. Iqbal thought for a long moment. He looked at her, and he remembered exactly how he had felt in the autumn after his wife's 2nd anniversary, sitting alone in front of a dark computer screen. "No," he said, "it is not too late. 10 minutes before you sleep, 2 or 3 sentences you love, whisper them softly in the dark, read them once in the morning before you touch anything else. Gather them all on a warm Sunday. Trust the 90 nights." She frowned. "That is all," she said. Iqbal smiled the small smile of a man who had learned a warm thing late in life.